Thank you. Thank you, Mike, for warming up the crowd for me. I am sorry to say that when I've discussed this topic on podcasts, the YouTube commenters say things like, "This is depressing," or "disturbing," or "It caused me to lose all hope for the future of humanity." So sorry. There's the door if you're riding high and want to keep that good feeling going. So I'm here to talk about a hypothesis. I have a hypothesis. I'm not sure it's right, but I think it is. You guys can tell me if you think I'm wrong. And that hypothesis is that many of the cultural changes that we've been talking about and fighting about for the past 10 to 20 years are the very predictable consequences of the rise of women in science and society. So, woo! So in order to explain my hypothesis, I have to give you a quick and dirty little intro into evolved psychological sex differences. Men and women achieve reproductive success in slightly different ways, and therefore, men and women have slightly different values, preferences, and priorities. In order to be reproductively successful, women had to live a really long time. They had to live 9 whole entire months during their pregnancy, and given how terrible children are at keeping themselves alive, they really had to continue to stay alive for like 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. And so in order for women to be reproductively successful, they had to have characteristics that help them avoid risks and help them care for vulnerable others. So women are more risk averse than men. They prefer to befriend highly trustworthy and equal status others. They want to surround themselves only by the most morally pure and trustworthy people. And they have high concern for protecting vulnerable others. Men, on the other hand, in order to be reproductively successful, they needed to gain access to women. And the way they did that was by competing in status-based hierarchies, climbing those status hierarchies to gain deference from other men and access to women, but they also had to cooperate within these large coalitions of men so that they could beat other groups of men and get access to their women too. So men benefited from demonstrating their merit to their peers so that they could build and climb these merit-based hierarchies. They wanted to identify competent others and cooperate with them, and they benefit from having maximally large groups. This is important. Men are trying to build these maximally large groups. Women are trying to purify and pare down to a group of trustworthy others. Okay, a very intuitive and memorable framework for these differences. My favorite is Joyce Benenson's Men as Worriers and Women as Worriers. And she has studied sex differences between infants, children, adolescents and young adults. Just to give you a little sample of some of her findings. Males prefer groups. They have larger networks. They affiliate more with peers. They're more tolerant of genetically unrelated peers. They dominate their peers to gain status. They affiliate more after conflicts and competition. So if 2 men get into some kind of conflict, it establishes who's higher in the status hierarchy, but they continue to be friends afterward. They affiliate more with peers of different ranks, so they're happy to work with people above them and people below them. They prefer friends with status potential, people who are competent and high in merit, and they're more hierarchical and meritocratic. Females relatively prefer dyads. They're more likely to terminate friendships, exclude allies, eliminate competition, hold grudges, pare down large groups via ostracism. They prefer performing the same as their peers, the logic here being people who are above you are potentially posing a threat, but people below you that might cause them to be jealous, and that poses a threat to you too. So better we're all the same. They're more empathic and they're more helpful toward victims. They self-protect more. They prefer loyal friends, and they're more egalitarian. The cutest demonstration of this in one of her papers, this was a study with, I think these were like 3 to 5-year-old boys and girls, and she gave these little boys and girls stickers to distribute to these 2 different colorings. One you can see is a pretty nice coloring, the other one is more scribbles. Boys were more likely to give more stickers to the good coloring, and little girls were more likely to distribute the stickers equally to the two colorings. Okay, why is this relevant at a conference on censorship? Well, many institutions, most institutions even, were created by men, for men. Men participated in them first for a long time, including academia. This is true across countries. Women joined academia much later. They weren't allowed to participate, but nonetheless, they weren't there. And so the status quo in many institutions should reflect male preferences and priorities. So in academia, we do have these large merit-based hierarchies. We have direct competition for publications, for grants, for awards, for jobs. These are more male-oriented values. However, very recently, very recently, only in the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, women have started to dominate academia. This top graph, so these are both the US, but similar patterns are true in other like Western countries. The top one is PhDs, and so you can see starting around, I don't know, like 2009-ish, I think, women started to earn the majority of PhDs. The bottom graph is faculty at higher education institutions. And I think around 2019, women officially also are the majority of professors. This shift, women being a very small minority of participants in an institution to being the majority participants in an institution, have some predictable consequences. These predictable consequences that I'll talk about are increased preference for equity over merit-based hierarchies, increased harm avoidance, and increased ostracism as like the preferred strategy for dealing with conflict. Okay, so first I'm gonna go over some like anecdotes that demonstrate these things have happened, and then I'll get into some data from various scholars who've looked at actual self-reports of men and women and what their values are, what their stated values are. Okay, equity over merit-based hierarchy. Many universities eliminated standardized testing. This is a measure of merit in order to make sure we're putting the top students at the top schools and in the top programs. A lot of universities decided to get rid of those. We have a problem with grade inflation, which is true K through 12, but also in colleges as well. What is the, Luana? The average GPA, what is it these days? 3.9. I hope you're lying. It's 3.9? Oh, good God. Okay. Yeah, grade inflation. And then you might be like, well, these are just like the most talented kids ever. But actually, they're performing terribly on the standardized testing. So this 3.9 GPA, I don't think is smartest kids ever. I think it's equal distribution of the stickers. Everybody gets an A. The introduction of diversity, equity, and inclusion committees. Conveniently, they put the word equity right in there, so preference for equity. Tens, hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on these programs across the US. Increased preference for harm avoidance. Many universities have started putting trigger warnings on books that had been taught for decades. Now the students can't handle them and they have to they're too psychologically upsetting for students and they need these trigger warnings. The introduction of safe spaces, often targeted at groups that are perceived as vulnerable and in need of this extra protection. The introduction of anonymous reporting systems at schools where anybody can report anybody for saying anything and then an investigation will happen. This is all trying to minimize potential risks and potential harms. Increased incidences of scholars being targeted for their teaching and research. If you read through these cases, the vast majority of them seem to have something to do with professors said something that could be perceived as harmful, and especially perceived as harmful to groups that are perceived as vulnerable. I made this slide before Ivan's talk, so maybe this is a bad piece of evidence. I agree that the vast majority of retractions are for legitimate reasons like errors and fraud. Nonetheless, it's very obvious that many retracted papers are retracted on the basis of harm concerns about the conclusions, and especially that they could harm vulnerable groups. The introduction of, explicit policies that are harm-based policies, indicating that papers might be rejected or retracted on the basis of harm concerns, and again, usually to groups perceived as vulnerable. Ostracism as the conflict resolution strategy, that is the cancel culture strategy. When men get into a conflict, or a man does something wrong, his status takes a hit, he gets kicked down the hierarchy, he has to prove himself and earn his way back up, but he's not kicked out of the group altogether, because we can't just afford to be kicking people out left and right when, maximally large groups are more competitive. We want to make sure we're taking advantage of everybody's skills. In contrast, for women, the solution would be, if you've shown me that you're a risky person, you're a person who's posing risks of harm to others, I don't give a shit what you can contribute or do in the future. You're out forever and you're never welcome back. That is a more female-oriented strategy, and it is also the strategy that we see in cancel culture. Okay, how you guys doing? Okay. I will be at the end of this. So actually this is a good time to get to the data, because last year tendency is to say women don't really have these values and priorities. Well, they will tell you to your face that they do. If you talk to them, if you interview them, if you survey them, they will tell you that they do have these different priorities. So there have been several surveys. I'm just going to present, maybe 5 of them. This is a 2017 YouGov survey. They found that a majority of men felt that colleges should not protect students from offensive ideas. They supported controversial speakers' right to speak on campus. They reported that colleges should not disinvite speakers if students threaten violent protest. And they opposed confidential reporting systems for offensive comments. For all of those, the majority of women felt the opposite. A 2018 Knight Foundation survey of college students found that a majority of men felt that protecting free speech is more important than promoting an inclusive society, and that it's never acceptable to shout down speakers. For both of those, the majority of women held the opposite views. So again, these are both about minimizing harms. 2021 CSPI, that's the Center for the Study of something. Eric Kaufman, I think, is involved. Maybe. Yeah. Of over 3,700 academics and PhD students, found that 66 to 75% of men support intellectually foundational texts above diversity quotas on reading lists. 44 to 66% of women support diversity quotas above foundational texts. That is an example of a preference for equity. Everybody's ideas are represented equally on the reading list, regardless of which ideas are potentially more influential or important. Female academics are more supportive of dismissal campaigns against colleagues who reach controversial conclusions. So this is ostracism of people who say things that are potentially harmful. Rausch and colleagues had over 570, undergrads, grad, and PhD students, and he asked them to allocate 100 points to 5 different academic priorities. And men allocated relatively more points toward academic freedom and advancing knowledge than women, and women allocated more points toward social justice and emotional well-being than men. Again, so trying to prevent potential harms to vulnerable people. Survey of psych professors that I ran. This is a response to the question, should scholars be completely free to pursue research questions without fear of institutional punishment for their conclusions? Majority of men say yes. Fewer say it's complicated, almost none say no. Among women, almost none say no, but the majority say it's complicated, and fewer say Yes. So women are willing to negotiate the pursuit of truth with the possibility that some people might need to be punished or kicked out if they come to a conclusion that's potentially harmful. Responses to the question, if pursuit of truth and social equity goals appear to come into conflict, which should scientists prioritize? Majority of men say truth, fewer say it's complicated. Majority of women say it's complicated, fewer say truth. So women are more willing to negotiate the pursuit of truth with equity, a moral goal. This is support for various actions against scholars who forward biological explanations for group differences. Reason it's that is the category of conclusion in the behavioral sciences that's the most taboo and gets you in the most trouble. You can say things are caused by discrimination, oppression. You can't say it's caused by biology or evolution or genes. No differences between male and female psychology professors in support for normal scientific criticism. Both of them support that highly. But women are more supportive of socially ostracizing them, of publicly labeling them pejorative terms such as bigot, racist, sexist, disinviting them from talks, refusing to publish their work regardless of its merits, not hiring or promoting them even if they meet typical standards. No differences for stigmatizing grad students. I think that's because it's perceived as a vulnerable group. But more supportive of firing them, more supportive of shaming them on social media, and removing them from leadership positions. So all of this is kind of ostracism of people who are perceived as posing potential harms. I had the time, so I wanted to throw out a few other wild speculations about the cultural rise of women, because I think the cultural rise of women has affected probably just about everything that's been happening. But just for a few fun ones, I think the rapid increase in approval of same-sex marriage is probably in some substantial portion the result of the participation of women in culture and intellectual culture. Men are more opposed to homosexuality than women. The explanation for this is that men are looking for indicators of masculinity and formidability in other men. And so men who indicate, or rather signal signs of femininity, are off-putting to other men, whereas women don't give a fuck. We're like, gay people are great, it's really fun, what's the big deal? And so women are more supportive of same-sex marriage. I think it's no coincidence that many of the heroes of the gay community have been these powerful, influential women who used their status and influence to advocate for the gay community. So I think that potentially wouldn't have happened so fast if women weren't participating, or it might not have happened at all, actually. Increased concern for animal welfare. Women are more opposed to animal testing. They eat more plant-based diets. They have more empathy for animals. And one thing that's happened in academia is we've phased out a lot of animal testing that was being done with dogs and monkeys in particular. And I do know women they're more against animal testing. I don't know for sure the whole history of phasing out dogs and monkeys, but I can imagine that women got into the lab and saw what men were doing to dogs and monkeys, often for no obvious scientific benefit some of the time, and were probably horrified and contributed to phasing out that research. Increased mental health diagnoses. Women care more about invisible harms. The potential explanation for this is that women had to be concerned with nonverbal infants. If the infant's acting like something's wrong, the assumption is something is wrong. And so women care more about potential mental health problems. I have a little study I ran just the other day. Women are more likely to say that everybody should see a mental health therapist. They're more likely to agree that everybody needs considerable time for self-care. And so I think this has caused us to increase our diagnoses of existing mental health problems, but probably also has incentivized people to develop mental health problems to get certain benefits. So both the true and maybe not so true part of that. And the fall of competent but criminal men. I think because men care so much about competence, that if they have a leader who's a good leader and that leader is helping the coalition, they're willing to look the other way if that person is up to some shady business. In a survey I ran just the other day, I see that men are more supportive of leaders who break the rules. They're more supportive of keeping a leader in position, even if a lot of people are reporting that the leader's up to no good. And they also have a higher prioritization of competence over morality. And so I think as organizations brought in more women, and there were potentially these very high status, very competent, very successful men around, who everybody knew like that person was a shady individual, women would be more not okay with that and more likely to call it out. Okay, so the psychological tendencies, the values and preferences and priorities that women have that got them labeled the worriers, the things that make them excellent caregivers, those manifest in organizations and institutions in a way that women look more like the warriors for social justice. I used to kind of say that and say like this is a descriptive account. I'm not here to solve problems. I'm here to tell you what's going on. But I actually think, not only do I think that there's a fine way of dealing with this problem, I think that it's already happening and it'll keep happening. And that's that there probably were some untested assumptions. People were more on board with the way things were going. They shared the same values and priorities, so they didn't have to question, they didn't have to test, they didn't have to challenge those norms and those policies. And now that a new group has entered and they're starting to challenge those norms and policies now need to be justified, and they need to be justified with data. This is already happening. So a lot of people have looked at terrible consequences of eliminating standardized testing, and a lot of universities have put them back in place in the past year or two. People have studied how trigger warnings often backfire and make people have even more psychological discomfort, and a lot of people have gotten rid of those trigger warnings. I've looked at intuitions about how science is going to cause harm and find that people tend to exaggerate that and overestimate how much a scientific finding could cause harm. If you're going to claim that a scientific finding is going to cause harm, well, show us the evidence if that's your reason for being against it. And so I do think it's maybe going to be a little bit more work, but there's knowledge to be gained from checking our intuitions about what was working, and then we can take the good and the bad. And I think women have brought good things and they've brought bad things, and we just need to figure out what those things are, and then we can really appeal to the values and priorities that we all share. And I think that is the advancement of student science and society. And if we can get good evidence on what best advances those things, then maybe we will be able to agree a little bit, or rather at least come to some kind of agreement about what our norms and policies should be, even if we have slightly different values. That is all. But, yeah.
We're going to take questions, but I actually want to ask a question. I forgot to say, I'm the host of the Unspeakable podcast. I'd love to ask questions, so I can't. I need to ask the first question. I absolutely love this presentation. You've done amazing work here, and one of the things I love most about it is that you are young and you are an actual academic working now, and you are talking about this stuff. We're used to hearing about it from like feminists of yore, Christina Hoff Sommers, Camille Paglia, people like that. So what is it like for you in your day-to-day life, professionally and personally, as somebody who talks about this stuff?
This is the first time I've been in a room with this many people where nobody wanted to push me down an elevator shaft.
Wow.
So far as I know, I don't know
if you don't. It's only the first day of the conference. Yeah, exactly.
No, it's good and bad. Some people hate me. I'm glad to know who hates me. I don't go to social psychology conferences anymore. I don't think I'm really welcome there. But I've found people that I get along with better, and it's these peeps. So yeah, so it's pretty fun.
Do your students love you? Do you have like a cult following of students?
No, right now I only like mentor students for like independent research, and they all like me, and my students are like always very chill. I don't think it's the students a lot of the time. I think it's the professors that are the problem. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, we'll take questions.
Thank you. Leslie Beenan, formerly in the School of Public Health at OHSU, but not anymore. I have a question. How are you accounting for, I would like to push you down an elevator shaft, actually.
One is good.
I feel it's very unfair to blame women on a biological basis for these enormous changes that have happened in our world. And I'm wondering, how do you account for the fact that, like, which came first for, social media and all these things that changed? Because if you look at professions like K-12 teaching, they were always incredibly dominated by women for 100 years, and they didn't have great inflation. They weren't canceling people. Things were going pretty well until fairly recently. And similarly, nursing. I don't think nursing, which is highly dominated by women, suffers from the same problems that academia does. So, there's some pretty big counterfactuals to what you're saying. How are you dealing with this bidirectional causality?
Yeah. First, I would say I wouldn't blame women. Like, women are the way they are for very good reasons, and I wouldn't blame them. I think that this is an explanation for what's been happening. To your other questions, K-12 actually is increasingly female. You're right that it's been more female for longer, but it has become more female. Nursing, I think, is also a little bit different because it's a caregiving area, which it taps into the things that women are really good at. There are, of course, other confounding variables. You mentioned social media, and that one I don't know about. That one is hard because that changed a lot about how we argue with each other. But another one that other people at this conference have brought up several times is age. And then there's also ideology. So women are more left-leaning and women are younger because they entered organizations later. And young people are more this way, and liberal, further left-leaning people are more this way. But I actually have another hypothesis, which maybe you will push me down an elevator shaft, which is that I think because men are so good at navigating status hierarchies and learning the rules to gain status, that as women define those rules, men have become more feminine as well. And so I think young men, and in fact in some of my data I see that young women are the most supportive of censorship, I guess up here, and then here is older women and young men, and then here's older men. And so I actually think it's possible that men have come to embrace female values. That doesn't really answer your question. I think it's complicated. I don't know about social media, and I certainly don't think women are the only explanation for any of the things I talked about. Nonetheless, I think the consistency of the patterns across so many of these changes and how consistent they are with female values suggests that it's a likely potential contributor. Yeah, but I could be wrong.
Who do you, just gentleman over here in the black shirt? Sure, go ahead.
I'm Matt Morelli from Southern Oregon University, and I was wondering if some of the characteristics, female characteristics that you described early on in the strategies, are those more representative or less representative or representative of women in general in academia? Or are they more or less? And then maybe more or less in administrative roles?
That I don't know. Of those survey results I presented, some of them were with everyday people, some were with professors, some were with undergrads, grad students, and the patterns are similar. It's a different question of whether they're bigger in one domain or another, and that I do not know. I mean, one thing is that women who are participating in the status competition world that is academia probably are more masculine women on average, and so you would think then that they would have slightly more masculine values. But now that so many women are in academia and they're making up the majority, that should be shifting toward the female mean over time and going more that way. So yeah, I'm not sure, but it's possible, yeah.
We probably have time for about 2 more questions. I don't want to run 2 over, so sure.
So I'm Dean Musavi, an unaffiliated scholar. I have seen much the same pattern that you're describing here. I'm not sure I attribute it to biology, though, to enculturation. Because what I see emerging, and you see it in the development of codes of conduct and how they're imposed in professional societies, is going from a admittedly flawed, but basically merit-based system where people are judged by their ideas and their contributions, to more like Sweet Valley High, the science version, where we are returning to a very petty, selfish, well, you offended me and my values, therefore I'm going to punish you type approach. It's not about protecting vulnerable populations, it's about protecting one's own agenda and one's own advancement. is this perhaps maybe not so much a biological issue as a cultural issue?
Well, women self-protect themselves more and vulnerable people and organisms more. To whether it's biology, I mean, I guess, are you proposing an alternative? Because why has the change happened if not? Like, what is the alternate explanation that would change this culture? This culture shift would happen for no apparent reason. Well, feminism is also a consequence of the rise of women too. So yeah, I mean, there's a chicken or egg problem, and I do think these feed back into each other. So yeah, as women's values become more popular, their values are also going to self-select for those values, and so things will snowball and continue to increase. I think that this is the most like parsimonious explanation given the consistency, but yeah, could be wrong. Yeah.
Oh boy. You probably do want us to wrap up, so we're going to take the woman in the red here.
Hi, I'm Julia Mason. I'm here with the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, but I'm a pediatrician. And you are reminding me of advice that I give to parents of like middle schoolers who are taking a stimulant to help them with their ADHD. If it's a girl, I say it's more advisable to take it 7 days a week because girl society is far more unforgiving than boy society. If you impulsively say the thing that pops into your head to the queen bee and you piss her off, you might need to change schools. Like, you're done.
Yeah.
And whereas, like you said, boys can have a fight, they can have a fist fight, and once they decide who's on top and who's next, then they're good and they move on. So I guess that's just a supporting point from the children, from what I see in the children.
Yes, that is consistent. Yeah, that's an interesting case.
Okay, let's take one more that is a question, and Cory can answer it, and then we can wrap up. I'm trying to think of somebody who didn't already ask a question. Okay, everyone's pointing at somebody over there. Okay, great.
Hi. Yeah, so my question kind of picks up on the first question. Here, there is an interesting historical argument. In one of your slides, you pointed out about anonymous reporting, right?
Sorry?
Anonymous reporting
Yeah.
on campuses, and there is an entire culture that has been based on anonymous reporting in the USSR. I don't think anybody can accuse Stalin or Lenin of being women. Moreover, there were only like 2 or 3 women in high-level Politburo. So I was wondering, what was your explanation for that? Is that a deviation?
No, I was actually thinking about that during your talk. I think this is my understanding what's happening in the West. I don't know what the dynamics are like in other countries, and certainly women are, I think, probably generally less authoritarian than men. I think men probably try to control speech and other people for like a different set of motivations than women. And so absolutely you can get, and you do get, some of the strictest like regimes of censorship are countries that are dominated by men, and women are excluded entirely from participating. So that happens too. Here, this is specifically referring to that culture change in Western cultures and how that change has co-occurred with women joining. So yeah, that's maybe a lame answer, but that's my answer.
Okay.